Hello everybody, welcome back to the Yotso Tech Tracks YouTube channel. Tonight will be a quick topic regarding something on this 2016 Ram 1500 truck. It's going to be the electric power steering, EPS as it's called by FCA, Fiat Chrysler Automobiles, or Stellantis, I believe as it is called now. This vehicle, like many vehicles nowadays, comes with electric power steering from the factory. Some people like this, some people don't. The traditional setup is basically an engine-driven hydraulic pump, which is going to be providing servo assist to be able to turn the wheels, to make it easier for the driver to maneuver the vehicle in slow maneuvers especially, but also in higher speed maneuvers where more force would be required. And it is just going to be providing additional assist, so even the smallest, weakest driver will be able to turn the vehicle's steering wheel in pretty much all situations encountered. Now, a traditional setup, basically it is a very old design, and it is a very good design as far as reliability, steering feel, and it is not expensive to manufacture. But one thing manufacturers nowadays are trying to do is increase the fuel economy of vehicles wherever they can. They have to meet the CAFE standards, such as the corporate average fuel economy. So the lower those numbers, the better for the manufacturers. Basically, they can sell more vehicles with higher emission outputs. It is a system that works like that. Anyway, the traditional setup, as I said, is a hydraulic pump that is engine driven, and there are hydraulic hoses, high pressure hoses, low pressure hoses, there's a reservoir, and there is some kind of a steering ram incorporated into the design, whether that is part of the power steering rack, if it is a rack and pinion steering, or it is part of the steering box, if it is basically a worm and shaft or such a design. Some manufacturers also have a traditional steering box that is basically a mechanical system, and it has hydraulic ram overlay, which you can imagine it is basically a piston, and when the driver turns the wheel, there's going to be a valve inside the mechanism. It's going to be transferring hydraulic fluid from one side to the other. Basically, when driving in a straight line, a traditional system, from memory and from working on vehicles and back in the days when I went to school, for example, it causes about 100 pounds per square inch on both sides of the system. So when you're driving in a straight line, for example, let's say there is a hydraulic part of the system that is going to allow the vehicle to turn easier to the right side, and also there's one on the other side for left turning. Now, when you're driving in a straight line with no steering wheel input, there is going to be, for example, 100 pounds per square inch on both sides of the piston. It won't cause any steering movement without the driver intervention. If the steering would move, that is a serious problem. However, in a normal situation, the pump is basically creating flow, and there are restrictions in the system, and it's going to cause a parasitic draw on the engine, even going in a straight line when you don't need power assist steering. Now, what manufacturers can do with electric power steering, for example, they can vary the output very quickly with modern electronics, computers, and sensors, such as what the driver is intending to do, what is the steering wheel angle in a situation that is pre-programmed into the vehicle. For example, it can prevent torque steer, such as in front-wheel drive vehicles. If, let's say, you have high amount of torque placed to the front wheels and you have some kind of a pull because of dissimilar drive shafts or anything like that, the electric power steering can actually correct the vehicle to go in a straight line. So the manufacturers can do a lot of neat things with electric power steering. One of the downsides to this technology is it gets rid of a lot of the steering feel. Now, this is subjective to the driver. It depends on the manufacturer about how much steering feel they are willing to give to the driver. They can mask a lot of unwanted situations and feedbacks from the steering and suspension back to the steering wheel. Some of the reasons electric power steerings have a bad rap is because manufacturers actually do tend to tend to place certain things over others as far as what they want the driver to feel or not feel. Basically, if you're looking at this 2016 Ram 1500 truck, it has nothing special. It is just basically rack and pinion steering, which already gives a nice feel, on-center feel to the vehicle. It gives a very smooth transition from left to right, and basically it is an electric motor that is incorporated right into the design. So when you turn the wheel, basically you're telling the computer that you want to assist in one way or the other, and there is a speed sensor inside, how quickly you turn the wheel, and also an angle sensor regarding what the driver is going to do. And the computer basically, it can give as much or as little force as deemed necessary to turn the vehicle. This can be tuned in some vehicles, not this vehicle particularly, but a lot of manufacturers do allow the driver to choose what is basically a steering feel. So to give more assist but less feel, or less assist but more steering feel. So you can tell what the front wheels are doing, for example. Now, this is always a compromise regarding what's better, what's worse. Again, some vehicles, if they do let you play around with these settings, it can give the driver a more individualized experience. Some people like to have maximum steering feel and a very heavy wheel where you have to fight the wheel more. Other people, for example, want a very light steering wheel and they don't want any feedback from the steering wheel. So electric power system does provide a lot of manufacturers more leeway with that kind of a system. Technically, on paper, this system is supposed to be a little bit more reliable. There are less moving parts, and you're getting rid of the hydraulic pump, high pressure hoses, reservoirs, a lot of that system for hydraulics. Over time, there are seals that tend to go bad, hoses can break, and even though electric power steering does have a lot of different type of designs, such as wiring and electric motors, if built properly and if built adequately for the vehicle, it should last the life of the vehicle. It does tend to take a lot of power from the electrical system because you don't get something from nothing. Whether you are needing power to come from hydraulics or you need power to come from the electrical system in the vehicle, that has to come from somewhere. So the alternators on these modern vehicles, they have to be high output because the more electronics you have to keep up with that demand. Usually, because vehicles like this 2016 Ram 1500, it does have what's called a smart alternator. It doesn't always keep the battery fully charged as in a traditional system. It is not always charging it at 14.4 volts. So the battery has to be large from the factory because, let's say, the alternator is not giving maximum output for whatever reason, is not deemed necessary. That reserve of electricity has to come from a big battery. So it's basically a trade-off about having less hydraulic systems but having a more complicated electrical system. Now, when the vehicle is going to more and more electronics, that system is already a given in a vehicle that is going to have already full of electronics, so it is not a big deal for manufacturers nowadays. If you were to implement a system like this in vehicles 10, 20, 30 years ago, again, you would have had to redo the electrical system. You would have to have heavy-duty electronics that those vehicles were not required to do. Again, in this Ram 1500 truck, my experience with this is actually pretty good. I've driven numerous vehicles, both electronically assisted steering, hydraulic assisted steering, and I have no complaints about it. I still think the steering feel on this truck is pretty good for what it is. I mean, it's not a sports car, it's not a Corvette, it's not a Ferrari, it's not a Ford Mustang, it's not a Challenger. It's basically a work truck that is basically being used for day-to-day daily driver duties and family adventures and things like that. So for what it is, this vehicle has really nice steering as far as I'm concerned. It does turn larger tires than factory. I believe the factory tires on this truck were, I believe, Goodyear Wrangler SRA, which is basically a highway rated tire. They were 265/70 17-inch, which would make them roughly 31.5 inches in diameter or thereabouts. I have since gone to a Goodyear Wrangler Duratrack 285/70 17-inch, which is basically a 33-inch equivalent, so it has a little bit wider footprint and it is a little taller overall, but nothing major, and it is not putting too much strain on the system. I mean, when you have a tire with a larger footprint, of course it's going to be more difficult to turn. When you have a vehicle with the wheels themselves have a larger mass, it is going to make the system work a little bit harder. I mean, how much harder, who knows? Who can say if that is going to actually reduce the life of the system? If you think about it logically, anything that you put a larger strain on the system will reduce its life, but by how much, that is up for debate. Anyway, I'm hoping to get the full vehicle life out of this power steering system. It is not cheap. That's one thing with the older systems with hydraulics. When individual components go bad, yes, it can be expensive when the whole system has to be repaired. However, when one thing goes on, usually it's a hose or an O-ring leak, it just makes a mess with the hydraulic oil, and well, it's not too expensive to fix. The good thing about those systems, even if you do have a leak, it basically undercoats your vehicle, because the power steering fluid is very similar to a automatic transmission fluid. So it is a very good lubricant. But the downside is it is toxic fluid, it is messy, it is less efficient as far as from the manufacturer's point of view. Nowadays they always put fuel economy standards over all else, except for if it's a very specialized vehicle. Now when they're making millions and millions of these pickup trucks, if they can get those fuel economy numbers down, it is a system that's actually a pretty decent system for what it is. Again, I have no complaints about it. This truck drives perfectly straight, smooth. The steering feel is very nice. The one thing I've noticed in this Ram compared to other full-size pickup trucks I do have in the past, the turning diameter isn't that great, but that just depends on the wheel cut, how much the manufacturer is allowing the wheels to turn, whether that's limited by wheel well clearance or by CV drive shaft angles, who knows. But I have noticed that this truck, compared to many different trucks I had before with similar wheelbases, this thing does have a very large turning diameter. So it is what it is. Again, it's one of those things that you just have to make do with what it is. I never once have to parallel park this or turn around in tight areas. So for myself, that is just something I've noticed, but it's nothing to complain about. And besides that, this truck is meeting all my expectations, my needs. I have nothing I dislike about it so far. Again, this has about 20,000 kilometers on it right now, and hopefully it will be very reliable for as long as I can keep it on the road. And once again, I will update you guys on anything, if anything goes wrong with this, to help the community out, share my information, share my knowledge for the greater benefit of anybody who needs it. Knowledge is power, and information like this is free, and it's good to have in the community. So thank you very much for listening and watching. Once again, this is Yotso from the Yotso Tech Tracks YouTube channel. If you like what you listen to, if you like what you watch, let me know, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you like, that always helps, and I'll see you next time. So thanks again, take care, and goodbye for now. Bye bye.